This is God's Hand in History, brought to you by Mr. Mack.
This is J.B. Mack for God's Hand in History. This is podcast number 5, and we're going to be talking about miracle number 3 this time, about George Washington being bulletproof. Now, I don't know if he's really bulletproof, but you need to know about this miracle. Here we have George Washington that God has set aside to be the leader of the country, and so he's been putting him into a position where he is going to be being prepared to be the commander of our troops. This is early in the French and Indian War. George Washington has been sent before up to the Great Lakes all by himself. He was 21 years old. He had gone with a small group of men, forged the way up through the forest to be able to take a message to the French commander there, letting him know that the French should not be coming down the Ohio River trying to take that land that was all west of the Appalachians. George had spotted a real key post where there should be a fort, and this is where Pittsburgh will be today, but it was on the Ohio River, at the fork of the Ohio River. And at this point, they have discovered that the French have come down and they've established a fort there that they call Fort Duquesne. Now, George has come in before this time, and he's come in with the Virginia militia. He'd gone in scouting out the area. While he was in there, he established his own little fort, Fort Necessity, in the Great Meadow. And the French had found out he was there. They had driven him out. He is now just simply a militia officer, and the British have decided they're going to come in and they're going to make sure that the French do not make a set of forts down the Ohio River and claim all that territory west of the Appalachians for theirs. So we have General Braddock comes in with 1,700 troops, and he's going to go in there, and they're going to create a road all the way across the Appalachian Mountain Range and attack that fort. He has all these troops. They have thousands of horses. They have a massive artillery group with them, and they're going to be forcing their way there, but they need somebody who knows the area. The only one there that knows the area is George. He's been there before. He's got the Virginia militia with him. Braddock puts him as one of his aides de camp, and the Virginia militia is going to act as scouts going ahead of this huge group of British army to make a narrow way across the mountains. The problem here is they're having a very narrow front. They're wide enough for maybe 4 soldiers abreast, plus the supply wagons and the artillery, so it's really not a very big fighting front. But they work their way across the mountains, and now they're getting to the point where they're getting close to Fort Duquesne and a place where they can establish an assault on it. George has pointed out that the best way is to come down, cross over a bend in the river to a meadow that's there, an open meadow, but then they have to angle up a forested hillside, steep to the right, steep down to the left, to get up to where the plateau will be, they will have their attack. So they have this long column, about 2 miles long, of British troops, and then their artillery, and then their baggage train, and then more troops. And they start up through this divide where they have guys ahead with axes clearing the way, and they get about halfway up the slope, and the French, with about 600 Indian allies, have found out about them, and they have come in and they've created an ambush. They've got Indians up the slope, down the slope, and as the soldiers get in there, they attack. Well, the British soldiers, used to fighting European style, have no idea how to do this. They're standing there being assaulted on every side by people who are all behind the trees. The ones in front start trying to pull backwards. They're stumbling over their dead and they're wounded. The ones behind hear the firing and they try to push their way forward. It becomes a real jumble and chaos. There are 17 officers that are on horseback. George is one of them, and Braddock is in there at the very beginning, and they're pushing their way through this crowd, trying to bring some sort of order out of this. In the process, Braddock gets 2 horses at least shot out from under him. He gets mortally wounded. George has 2 horses shot out from under him. In the process of getting everybody back to safety and get a fighting retreat, the Virginia militia moves forward and begins their Indian-style counterattack against the Indians, holding them back while the British Army pulls back. Of the 17 mounted officers, all are killed except for George Washington. They're all shot off their horses, or horses shot. George is the one who has to organize the retreat, get them down out of there onto the meadow, and then from the meadow, get the baggage train and the civilians with them back down the route they came to safety. He's able to do that. Now, for him to survive all of this is just unbelievable. He's able to take Braddock, and he needs to be buried immediately because they know there's going to be a continuing counterattack. They bury General Braddock's body in the trail, run over it with horses and wagons so nobody will be able to find it, and desecrate his body. But George, who's the only officer on horseback that survived, after the war takes place and after the French and Indian War, the Indian chiefs who were involved in that fighting for the French came to him and they said, "Your God must be more powerful than any God we've ever seen." He had 7 bullet holes in his jacket. They said, "We who were there and our snipers were concentrating on fire on you, and none of us could hit you. You have a greater God than we have." And that's what God did. He created essentially a bulletproof George Washington who had this experience so that later on, when the French and Indian War is over and then the colonials are beginning to fight against the British, George Washington will be brought up to be the commander of our troops. And this is one of the ways he came through the battle on by God's protection. This is J.B. Mack for God's Hand in Mystery. I want to bless you. God bless you. Have a great week. Tune in next time for miracle number 4. And miracle number 4, we'll have another one in a series of 34 miracles to show you what God has done to make this one nation under God. Just remember, truth will be heard.